Hello and welcome to the latest episode of the Inside Game podcast. This episode is in association with Raymond Waters at the Old Coach Inn Castleblaney. And here's a word from Rays Tanning and Wellness in Auchnacoy.
Rays are the first on the island of Ireland to offer the Red Wave Pure Red Light Therapy Bed, a cutting-edge recovery tool now being used by top athletes worldwide. Whether it's muscle soreness, inflammation, joint stiffness or speeding up overall recovery, red light therapy is becoming a genuine game changer. So if you're training hard, coming back from a knock or just wanting to stay injury free, call into Rays and experience the benefits for yourself. Rays Tanning and Wellness, helping athletes recover faster, perform better and stay in the game.
Hello everyone and welcome to today's short episode of the Inside Game podcast. I did have a high profile Mayo guest lined up for this week to preview Mayo v Armagh in Castlebar, but unfortunately and for genuine reasons he wasn't able to come on last minute and finding a short notice replacement hasn't been possible. But not to worry, there are more guests lined up over the next few weeks to keep things moving along nicely. So today instead I'll take the opportunity to talk briefly about the platform, past, present and future, and then offer my 2 cents worth on where I believe Armagh are at currently or where they might be headed. First thing I'd like to do though is again give a shout out to the podcast sponsors for their continued support. Raymond Waters at the Old Coach Inn Castleblaney and of course Rays Tanning in Auchnacoy. Much appreciated to the guys there as always. My dad, Eugene Craney, was the very first guest of the show, and along with that and the use of his platform, Eugene Craney Sports Media, it gave the Inside Game podcast and the Inside Game brand in general a good boost from the get-go. When I started out in November of 25, I entered into it with hope rather than any real certainty of bringing in big names that people would enjoy listening to. But once Aidan Falker and Aaron McKay agreed, I felt there was probably a good chance that other high-profile guests would be easier to convince, and that has certainly turned out to be true. Recently retired Armagh player Jamar Hall came on, as did 2002 All-Ireland winner Benny Tierney, and it was great to hear from them both. I invited on guests from the 3 club championship winning teams in Armagh, Clonmore's Caelan Donaghy, Sarsfield's Eamon McGowan and Madden's Conor Grimley, who all gave brilliant insight into their journeys to picking up county silverware. Down's 2010 All-Ireland finalist Dan McCartan was the first guest outside of Armagh to come on before the National League got started up, where I then reached out to Banty McEnany of Monaghan, former Galway player David Wynne, and then Rossi podcast host Dara O'Connor, before the most recent one, Brenton Devaney of Donegal. It's been such an enjoyable experience speaking to all these true Gaels, all very knowledgeable, with great stories from their time in Gaelic football. The platform initially started on Facebook only, but in more recent weeks and months has branched out into YouTube and Spotify, TikTok and Instagram. So please head over there and give those places a follow as well. Facebook for sure has been the fastest growing, with the first 1,000 follower milestone recently reached, and it's still growing. So many thanks if you followed along and been listening to the podcasts or taking an interest in the articles that have been posted up. And just lastly, regarding the podcast, don't be afraid to get in touch if there's someone you'd like to see on the show, or even if you want to recommend someone who might be interested in coming on. It's not always possible to get everyone on, but it's certainly possible to reach out and to ask.
Just a shout out and a thank you to Raymond Waters at the Old Coach Inn Castleblaney for the continued support of the podcast. If you're ever in Castleblaney, or even if you're not, why not visit the Old Coach Inn for a fine dining experience and entertainment in their friendly bar and lounge. That's in the Old Coach Inn Castleblaney.
So if we move on to Armagh now, if you've been following the Inside Game social media feeds, you may have noticed some articles written in the wake of the Donegal game and in the league campaign in general. Suppose if we step back and look at Division 1 right now, the fixture list this weekend is well teed up and we'll have a lot of eyes on it. The top 4 are all at home to the bottom 4. So on paper it looks like the rich could be getting richer here. But the key point is this: Armagh, as it stands, aren't in the worst placed position. Every team in that lower half is staring at a serious test. And yes, Armagh have lost 3 in a row. Yes, the table looks uncomfortable, but none of the other sides down there have an easy time either. Surviving isn't undoable. In fact, it may very well come down to the Dublin game in Croke Park with the head-to-head scenarios in play. But for sure, a way to help matters would be to go to Castlebar and take something this weekend. That's easier said than done, of course, but it's not out of the question. The margin in these games have been fine. This team hasn't been blown away, even with 14 points down in Roscommon. Clawing it back always felt possible. It's a team that hasn't quite been clinical enough at one end and too open at times in defence, but there were certainly positives of more cohesion at the back against Donegal. I also wrote an article about following Armagh and the GAA in general, and just something that noticed was in the build-up to big games, supporters tend to be measured and even hedging their bets a little, analysing matchups and listing injuries and acknowledging form, sort of speaking in probabilities, and then you hear phrases like, we could win, but it'll take a huge performance. It all feels very balanced and fair. Leading into Donegal, the game, the general feeling was one of a difficult encounter that may even be just beyond us. But then the ball gets thrown in and hope replaces probability. We get an early score, or maybe a turnover, or a bit of momentum, and what felt maybe unlikely started to feel like it could be possible, and belief grows and expectation shifts with it. So when the result we openly admitted was possible actually happened, the defeat that is, the reaction then rarely reflects that earlier realism. It then felt unacceptable. It felt like something had gone wrong. And I'm not criticising anything here, it's just an observation really of the difference in emotion that football can bring pre and post match. And another thing I suppose that brings out emotion is where this Armagh squad actually is. For the last number of seasons, as we know, the squad was renowned for depth, real depth, proven game changers stepping off the bench to swing tight matches, expertly constructed over many years, as we're all aware. But squads don't stand still and experienced players move on. Others step away, injuries hit key figures, and what replaces that experience is potential. And there are young, talented footballers coming through, players who could define Armagh football for the next few seasons, but expecting them to deliver instantly the same impact off the bench as seasoned campaigners in Division 1, it's a big task. These young players are in the process of developing their physical and mental fortitude to withstand the rigours of county football. It's not that they're not trusted, they're learning. And when injuries clear, Geezer will no doubt be back to bringing on strong subs to change games in the second half. So for my money, this squad isn't in transition, it isn't regressing. It's adjusting, it's absorbing change while trying to remain competitive at the highest level. And in Division 1, a ruthless Division 1, that's not an easy task. Which is why context matters, I suppose, heading into Castlebar, where Mayo are chasing the incentive of a league final, and that gives them motivation. Armagh are fighting to secure their place in the top flight, and that gives us motivation in a different way. Consecutive defeats isn't good for the mood of supporters, of course, but neutral voices such as Enda McGinley, Kieran Whelan, Pat Spillane across TV and podcasts have spoken about how performances have had their positives. There's structure there, there's competitiveness there, and with key players edging closer as the championship approaches, the bigger picture, which is the whole season, so to speak, still looks in decent enough shape. At the start of the season, most people will say the main objective was to stay in Division 1, and that is very much still alive. And sometimes all it takes is one afternoon, one disciplined, composed performance away from home, and it can flip an entire script. And you never know, Castlebar might just be that afternoon. So that wraps up this solo effort. The chat with interesting guests is really what the Inside Game podcast is all about. And hopefully I can continue to keep getting them on as the season hats up into the spring and into the summer. But until then, thanks for listening to the Inside Game podcast.